What's up, YouTubers and plant lovers? It's Justin, and today I was going to show you how I care for and repot my Ficus Maclellandii. Now, I'm sure you've heard it called the Ficus Alii, the banana leaf ficus, or the banana leaf fig. Some nurseries actually classify it as the Ficus longifolia, and in Europe I believe they catalog it as Ficus benedicti. Alas, I am talking about the Ficus Alii. Now, interesting enough, Ficus Maclellandii is actually, here in America, called the Ficus Alii. And I believe the Ficus Alii came into term because I think ancient Hawaii Ali actually stood for king. So this is the Ficus king, and for good reason. But this is a relatively new kid on the block. I believe it was actually brought into cultivation for the indoor plant growers around 1980, the late 1980s. So this tree has been around for quite some time. But it's recently gained in popularity due to its ability to actually survive and kind of thrive indoors over the last 5 or 10 years or so. So here recently it's actually started to gain in medium popularity and actually skyrocket a little bit for good reason. And I love this tree. This is a really easy ficus tree to care for. Way easier than its cousins Ficus benjamina, the weeping fig, or the Ficus lyrata, the fiddle leaf fig, or even the Ficus elastica for your rubber tree figs. But, interesting enough, ficus is actually Latin for fig. So just a little FYI for you. But, like I said, the common names of this tree is the banana leaf ficus or the banana leaf fig. And I think even some people call it like the eucalyptus leaf ficus or eucalyptus leaf fig. It's got some kind of an identity crisis, but it reminds me of a willow or a peach tree more than it does a banana tree. And if you ever try to grow banana trees in your yard, I have, I think 3. My mom's got 2 or 3. These leaves are a little kind of elliptical, kind of long, really kind of fat and thick and kind of robust. But these are narrow leaf ficus. Not to actually be confused with the narrow leaf ficus or the willow leaf ficus. But this tree, like I said, has just come into popularity here in America and in Europe not too long ago, and it's recent cultivation too. So this is a tree that I want to actually get a lot of people interested in because it is a really easy ficus to take care of. And out of all the other ficus, this tree is actually least likely to drop leaves if it's moved around or introduced to different lights over different periods of time. So you don't have to worry too much about the tree actually dropping leaves all the time. Now, I'm not saying that's unheard of because I know people do say that these trees do drop leaves, and they can be a little fussy. But out of the rest of the family, he is actually the most hardy and least fussy. So I wanted to go ahead and tell you how I actually care for this plant and give you a little bit of a good look at mine and show you all this necrotic cell tissue towards the end of the leaves where he is turning brown and discolored and dying. Now, what that tells me is that I have an inconsistent watering schedule with him and he's not been watered adequately. Now, this guy does hail from Southeast Asia, the south of Asia, China, India, the subtropics of that area where it gets relatively warm, kind of mild winters, but it's really humid and it's really warm. It's kind of a tropical, subtropical area. So they do like a lot of humidity. I think around 40 to 50% at least is sufficient for these guys. And if they don't have the right humidity, the leaf tips will actually start to turn brown. And if you're not giving them the right amount of water or an inconsistent watering schedule, you can actually encourage the leaves to actually start browning at the tips as well. But I know that mine are actually browning because I'm not giving him enough water. Like I said, these guys are from the tropics, so they are used to a decent amount of water. With their soil, though, they don't hold on to a bunch of water, so they like to actually have adequate drainage. and that the soil is actually pretty light and airy and porous, so it doesn't hold on to a whole bunch of water, and it drains all that excess out relatively freely. You'll have to excuse me, I just went to the doctor recently and they told me that I'm having a problem with my asthma and my allergies, so if I talk for long periods of times, I do start to feel winded and sound winded too. Now, these guys actually do like to be pot bound. I've had him for about 6 months now, and I've kept him in the same growing pot for that long on purpose. Like I said, they do like to be root bound, and they don't like to jump up too high in pot sizes too fast. I think this is a 4-inch grow pot, and I have a 6-inch new pot for him right here that I'm going to go ahead and transplant him into. But I want to go ahead and give you a little bit of background information and tell you how to care for one of these, because chances are you've seen them here recently. I know Lowe's has them. I think Home Depot has them. If you know me at all, you know that my favorite plants in the world are trees. I care a lot about trees, and I love bonsai, and my favorite plants are definitely trees, orchids, and cacti. But I do love all plants, but I do care deeply about trees. So as I was saying, they are native to around the subtropical areas, and this is an evergreen ornamental fig, and it is perennial, so if it's planted outside, you don't have to worry about dieback and it coming back, because this plant will be around for a long time. And I think in nature they do get over about 10 feet tall, and indoors they usually top out around 5 or 6 feet, but if grown in the right conditions they can approach 10 feet tall as well, but typically they kind of top out indoors at around 5 or 6 feet, and I don't think they get any wider than about 2 or 3 feet too. So they are a decently sized vertical plant, but horizontally they don't get too wide, so they don't need too much space. And they do have that kind of tropical oriental look with these kind of long, narrow, graceful, arcing leaves that do kind of point down. So they almost look a little bit like their weeping fig cousins, the Ficus benjaminus. They do have smaller leaves and more narrow leaves, and I believe the leaves reach anywhere from around 3 inches on up to about 10 inches. But like I said, they do kind of remind me of a willow tree or a peach tree, more so than the banana trees. Now, if you do find that you do like this tree, I wanted to give another shout out to a recent cultivar that actually came out of Holland called the Ficus Amstel King. So if you think that you would like to get a Ficus Alii and you're not sure if you want just a regular one, you should really check out the Ficus Amstel King, because those are a more robust, hardy, vigorous kind of tree, and the newer leaves actually come out to look a little bit more reddish and have a reddish kind of tint or hue to the leaves, and then as they mature and get established, they become a deeper, darker emerald green over time. Now, both trees come in a variety of different statues, so to speak. They do come in your single trunk, your multi-trunk, and then they do come braided also. Now, if you know me, you know that I am totally against braiding any tree. I think that's a really dumb idea because it requires a lot more attention, a lot more care, and not to mention it's a huge mess if one of the braids of the trunks dies and the other are alive. So that will look unsightly and you won't be able to actually unbraid it to remove the dead tree. It's just an all-around mess. It's up to you if you want to do that, but like I said, it is a mess, and they only braid it so far, and then you have to continue braiding. And if you really don't know what you're doing and how to train a tree to actually grow like that, you can actually cause a lot more problems and a lot more harm if you don't end up doing it the right way and removing the adhesives or the twist ties that you have on there to actually keep it braided. And if you don't braid it the right time, or if you braid it too late or too tight, like I said, you end up causing more problems than doing good by your plant. Whenever I talk about light, I want to go ahead and say that this guy does like a medium to bright indirect light. Now what I mean by that is I have mine in a south-growing window, but he's scooted back a little bit. Too much direct sunlight will actually burn this guy out, and you will notice signs of sunburn on your plant, and if left unchecked, you could actually cause severe damage to your plant and potentially kill your plant as well. An east or a west-facing window will be okay, but if you have it in the east window, you may have to supplement with some grow lights throughout the later parts of the day, and then you will be able to protect your tree from the sun during the harder parts of the day if you live in the northern hemisphere like I do. If you live in the southern hemisphere, it would be reverse. and you would actually have to put it in a north-facing window and scoot it back some. But like I said, you want kind of bright, indirect light with this guy. Like I said, I have mine in a south-facing window, and I do kind of supplement with grow lights throughout the later part of the day if I feel like he's not getting enough light. And then he does really well under some LEDs, and he seems to be happy with that. Coincidentally, if you have yours in a kind of dark or shaded area and it's not getting enough light, it'll be a long time before you notice new growth on your Ficus Alii. So make sure if you don't see a whole lot of growth and it seems to be wilting some, you do check the light because if it doesn't have enough light and it's not kind of a medium brightness, then you probably will stunt your tree and it won't grow, if even at all. And if left unchecked, you could potentially kill your plant if it's not getting enough light. Next, I want to talk about water with him. These are a pretty thirsty plant. They are moderate drinkers, so you want to water adequately, but you don't want to water too much, because these trees will actually succumb to root rot relatively quickly, despite their thirsty habits. So I always stick my finger down in the pot and up to about the first or second knuckle, and if I feel any moisture between there at all, I won't give them any more water. But like I said, if you're able to pick your tree up and you can tell based on weight that he seems pretty light, you can go ahead and water him again. Or if you stick your finger down in there and you don't feel any moisture at all, you can go ahead and give him some water. Ideally, you want to make sure about the first inch or so is actually dry before you water it again. And if you water too much, like I said, you will actually succumb to root rot, but these are kind of moderate drinkers. They do like their water. That being said, you want to make sure that the pot you're putting them in actually has a drainage hole in there. And then you want to make sure that the soil that you have actually doesn't hold under water too much and it actually kind of drains freely. Now, if you're going to be like me and you put your plant in a cache pot, which actually has a saucer attached to it, make sure you keep a close eye on your plant, especially when you water. If you give it water and after about 15 or 20 minutes, you can go ahead and dump the excess water out of the saucer. After about the 15 or 20 minute mark, your plant has already absorbed enough water that it will no longer be able to hold any more water. And any excess water that remains in the saucer will drown your plant out if you don't get rid of it. So always make sure that you drain the excess water out of your pot after about 15 or 20 minutes. If you don't think you'll remember, set an alarm, because if you leave too much water in there, your plant will drown. So if you do keep your plant in a cache pot, just make sure you know what you're doing and err on the side of caution. But like I said, there is a fine line with these guys, because if you allow it to dry out constantly, then you can suffer from twig dieback with this, or a lot of leaf drop too. So there are consequences to both sides, and you want to kind of hit it right in the middle and make sure that you're giving it a nice, even, consistent amount of water. You don't want to be inconsistent with your water, and you don't want to go too harsh, and you don't want to go too dry. It's a fine line, and you have to actually be able to ride it. And like I said, I considered myself somewhat of an expert grower, and I'm getting browning leaf tips on mine. Now, as I said, this is a more forgiving ficus than the rest of the family, so be considerate with yours and make sure you pay attention, because your plant will be telling you if you are messing up. Just make sure you know how to read the signs. Next, I want to talk a little bit about soil. Like I said, they're not too fussy with their soil, but they are a tropical plant. So you don't want a soil that holds on to excess water a lot. You want it to actually be able to be kind of light and airy, but nutritionally rich also. Now, I mix my own soil up together. I have a little bit of a tropical soil mixed in with a compost that I use, and a little bit of a cacti and succulent mix that actually kind of lets it drain out and get rid of the excess water, but actually gives it the right amount of nutrients that a tropical tree needs. If you're interested in what I use for my trees, send me a message or a comment and I'll let you know the exact ratio. Now, these guys aren't too heavy feeders though, so you don't have to feed your Ficus Alii all the time. And they're pretty happy with any kind of reputable, well-balanced fertilizer. I use a liquid fertilizer for mine, and I feed mine about once a month to once every other month. Like I said, they're not very heavy feeders, and I get by off about once every other month or so, and then in the fall and winter I stop feeding, and I don't start feeding again until the spring. Now once he wakes up for the spring and he's ending his dormancy period, I will go ahead and wake him up a little bit with some fish emulsion fertilizer that I think helps him out a little bit. But be careful, because the Ficus Alii has a boron sensitivity. So if you give it too much, you can actually end up killing your plant and then causing some problems too if you don't actually kill your plant. So just remember that they do have a boron sensitivity, and you don't want to give it a fertilizer that contains a lot of boron in it. One other thing I do want to mention is that this plant is a part of the ficus family, so don't forget it is toxic. It is especially toxic to children and pets as well. And if you have a latex sensitivity or a latex allergy, I wouldn't handle this plant at all, especially barehanded. So if you do have a latex allergy, I would use gloves whenever handling this plant. If you do regular pruning, you'll be able to tell that it does have kind of a white, milky latex sap that comes out, and if you get it in your eyes or your mouth, or if you do have a sensitivity to that, you can have a lot of problems. So just be very careful whenever you handle this plant, and wash your hands, and don't touch your eyes, and don't touch any kind of orifice that may end up leading that into your body. Now, one other thing I do want to talk about is problem with pests and diseases. This plant doesn't have too many problems in the way of pests. They do suffer from ficus mealybugs, whitefly, and scale. Now, all three of those can actually be combated by being rather vigilant. If you're actually coming in regularly and pruning it back a little bit, cleaning off the leaves, potentially giving your plant a bath, setting it in the tub, spraying it off with a detachable shower head, or taking it out back and spraying it off with a garden hose, then your plant won't actually have a problem with pests, and they won't actually give them time to come in there and set up shop. So actually, anytime that you notice that your plant's leaves are getting relatively dirty, just take your nice microfiber cloth or a washcloth. I use a solution of 3 parts warm water to 1 part lemon juice, and I come in with the washcloth and I go over the tops and bottoms of every leaf to actually keep them clean. This enables your plant to actually be able to photosynthesize at the right duration for the right time, and keeps your plant rather healthy. And it'll actually remove any kind of pest trying to come in here and set up shop on your ficus. So be rather vigilant and make sure you check your plant over and look him around and come in and clean and do some pruning. And if you do all that, you'll be able to combat any kind of infestations. If you do notice that you actually do have a light or a heavy infestation, you can use an organic route and use some neem oil, or you can use isopropyl alcohol and apply it to a washcloth and go over the tops and bottoms of all the leaves, over the stem and trunk very carefully, and make sure any place that you see any kind of filaments or any kind of pest that may be on there, that you apply isopropyl alcohol to the leaf on the washcloth and go over every nook and cranny of every leaf and every stem. And for harder to reach areas, you can use Q-tips with some isopropyl alcohol in there too. Alright, so now I want to actually come in here and loosen up the pot. Now I've got a little bit of movement here, so that tells me that he's not too tight in the pot. And ideally, the best time to repot your Ficus Alii would be in the spring or late winter. Now I didn't really want to go ahead and repot him now, but I can tell that he is getting a little tight. I can see a little bit of root growth from the bottom, and I just watered him recently, so I know that he is actually not too tight in his pot. And watering him before you actually go ahead to transplant will actually make your life 1,000 times easier. Wet soil is easier to handle than super dry soil that's all hard and compacted. So get in here with your fingers a little bit and loosen up some of this root mass just a little bit. These roots are really fine and thin, so it doesn't take much to damage them. So don't pull too hard. Loosen up gently with your fingers just to knock some of that soil loose. And then I'm actually going to cut a little back. Now you don't want to remove any more than about 20% of the roots from this guy at any given time. I suppose you could get away with about 25%. Like I said, I don't want to tempt fate, so I'm not going to remove more than about 20%. Just to make sure he's going to be okay. Like I said, he's not in his healthiest state, and he doesn't look the best right now, so I don't want to stress him out even more. And make sure your pruning shears are clean and sharpened. You don't want to cut on your tree with dull scissors that haven't been cleaned in ages, and won't actually remove any of these roots or leaves. So make sure that you get pruning sharpeners and actually come in and sharpen your pruning shears so that whenever you do have to cut on your tree, you're not causing it pain and messing up the roots or any of the leaves. Now, loosening all this up and cutting off some of the excess root helps encourage new root growth and lets them be able to expand better in their new home. If you were to take him out of his pot and directly put it into a new pot, a lot of that is root bound and tight and cramped, and it can't actually expand. So if you get in there with your phalanges or your fingers or your root rake and loosen some of that up, they're able to actually get in there and move around and spread out a lot easier than if you were to just kind of set them down in there. I guess I should put a disclaimer at the bottom that says, I know I'm doing this indoors. Every time I transplant a plant indoors, I get about 2 or 3 comments that says, I can't believe you're doing that indoors. To which I always say, if you keep your house clean and you keep containers underneath you to catch all the falling debris and soil, and you keep a broom and dustpan or a vacuum or whatever you can to clean any excess soil or loosen this up, you're fine. But if I were to do this outside in my busy neighborhood, you would be annoyed with me and ask why I'm doing it outside when you can't hear over all the cars and the people talking and the dogs barking and the cats meowing and everything. So I record indoors and then I clean up after myself. So yes, I plant in my living room. Alright, now whenever you're mixing in soil, you don't want to just layer it like lasagna and just set it on top. You want to actually kind of mix it all in so that it's available to all the roots kind of throughout the pot and it's all evenly consistent. Now as you pack it in, you want to kind of tamp it down with your fingers, and then you want to kind of scoot the soil back up on the walls. You want to create a little divot down in there so that when you take your root mass that's loosened up and set him down inside, he'll have a nice little indent that he can fit down in and fill out rather nicely. Now I will remove a little bit of this moss because he doesn't need so much in his new home, but I will leave a little bit in here to break down naturally with a little bit of this Osmocote fertilizer, and then this moss will kind of break down over time, and then it will also help retain a little bit of water to keep his roots fairly moist. Like I said, he's in a nice cache pot with a little saucer, so ideally he doesn't need a whole bunch of water because this pot is actually designed to actually help hold in some water. Now, these trees actually do relatively well in self-watering pots because of their high water requirements, but that makes me a little bit nervous, so I water him whenever I think it's time, and he tells me that he's thirsty. And then remember, as I add all the soil in, you want to lightly tamp down the soil around the whole root mass. Even around the stem, you lightly want to press down, and pressing all this down helps secure him in place with the soil, and then will also rid the soil of any kind of air bubbles that may remain intact that will potentially wreak havoc on your plant's roots. And then if you don't keep that in check, your plant will actually die. That's probably one of the most questions I get asked all the time, is what happened to my plant? I just repotted him and he's dying. He's wilting and he doesn't look good. And I always ask, did you tamp the soil down? Did you water after you repotted? And 99% of the time it's what's tamp, how much water was I supposed to water? So no, people don't tamp the soil down, and then they don't add water to help remove any other air bubbles that may remain around your plant's roots. And like I said, you want to monitor your plant's pH too, because they like the pH around 6.5 on up to 7. So slightly acidic is ideal for this ficus. I've got the soil about right where I want it. The only other thing I want to do is give him some water. Like I said, they are a little bit more sensitive. They have the boron sensitivity, and I don't like to give mine tap water. This is distilled water because they are sensitive to boron and they do have a little bit of other sensitivities, so I don't want to tempt his fate or tempt him with more discoloration and unsightliness, so I water him with distilled water. And like I said, these trees like to be pot bound, so I probably won't have to repot him for another 2 or 3 years. If you start to see roots coming out the bottom, which this is a cash pot, so I probably won't, I'll start to see roots coming more out of the top and feel like the pot is a little bit more heavy, and it's really the only way to tell with a cash pot or a terracotta pot. Although if you have a plant that has rather robust roots, they can actually break a porcelain or terracotta pot. But with these guys, it's harder to tell. So I can tell by the top of the plant if it looks like it may be about time for him to be repotted. And then what tells me it's time to be repotted from the top of the plant is if I keep everything else in check and I notice that he has rather egregious dieback or discoloration, and I know that his watering schedule is on par and where it's supposed to be, and then he looks like he's not actually doing well, but I've kept his fertilizer in check, his water routine in check, he's not been moved, and his light hasn't changed, but he doesn't seem to be growing anymore, and he's got leaf tip dieback, and it's been a couple of years since I've repotted, I'll probably go ahead and repot him. Like I said, these guys like to be pot bound, so you don't have to rush to pot them every year. Once every 2 to 3 years will suffice for your Ficus Alii. Alright, so after I've watered, I want to go ahead and come in with the pruning shears, the nicely sharpened and clean pruning shears, and cut off all this dieback on the leaf tips. You want to cut into a little bit of the green area, but just make sure that you don't cut too far into the green area. And everyone say hi to Harvey. Mr. Mischief. Now this dieback will not ever turn green again, so you do want to go ahead and cut all that off, just for aesthetic purposes. Alright guys, and as always, I wanted to give a special shout out to my top tier tree patrons like Thuyen. Thank you. And I also want to give another shout out to my other patrons like David and Heather. Thank you. If you're interested in supporting my channel through Patreon, please check the link in the description box below. As always, that money goes to keeping the lights on for the LEDs, making sure all the plants have adequate care and attention and a good home. Alright, and don't forget, this has been Justin reminding you that if you can, go out and plant a tree. Let's reforest the world. And while you're at it, don't forget, leave me a comment and let me know what your favorite type of ficus tree is. I really have to say that I love the new Ficus Alii. They are spectacular. And don't forget to hit the subscribe button or the bell next to it. That way you'll know anytime that I've uploaded a new video. You guys take it easy, have a good one, and don't forget, always plant prudently. Thank you, YouTube.